Hi there everyone, my name is Zach and welcome to my channel. Amongst other things, I'm a reenactor and a jouster. But this week, I want to get a little bit nerdy and talk about the history of Lord of the Rings. So those of you with large screens, or if you just like peering really deeply into your phone, will have noticed that I have a Lord of the Rings box on my shelf back there. It's not the only set of Lord of the Rings that I have. I absolutely love these books and have done ever since I was a small boy. One of the things that not everyone realizes about these is that Tolkien wrote them as the idea was that these were a translation of an original historical document that he had found that was originally written by the hobbits. So The Hobbit was meant to be written by Bilbo Baggins as a story of his adventure, which is why it's told kind of as a children's story. It was the way that he told it to Frodo. You may know that after he'd started writing The Lord of the Rings and he realized that he wanted the ring to be something more powerful, he had to go back and change something in The Hobbit. He had to go back and change how much effect the ring was having over Smeagol in The Hobbit. So the original version of The Hobbit has Smeagol very kind of less concerned about the ring. He then changed it later on, and he came up with the idea that the original version was the story that Bilbo told first of all, and the version that we have now is one that Frodo edited when he found out what the ring actually was, and he found out the true story from Bilbo once they knew what the ring actually was. The three Lord of the Rings books then, The Fellowship, The Two Towers, Return of the King, including all of the appendices, are meant to be written by Frodo and a small part by Sam. That makes it quite interesting because if you consider it like that, then the storytelling gets that much more nuanced. There are a lot of those three books that Frodo was not an eyewitness to. So, for example, basically from the breaking of the Fellowship onwards, Frodo wasn't an eyewitness to those things. So we need to ask, how did he find out about those things? It's quite clear from the appendices. He got a lot of his information from the other members of the Fellowship. And of course, Merry and Pippin would have been key to him finding out all of those details. Here's why I'm bringing this up. The story, The Lord of the Rings, is written as kind of a bit of an epic with some characters that are kind of greater than we would imagine in real life. People like Theoden, Gandalf, and Aragorn kind of seem untouchable, with not really having any doubts. This is changed for the films that Peter Jackson made. And the characters are made, to a certain extent, a bit more believable. Aragorn has doubts about whether or not he would make a good king. In fact, he doubts himself more than anyone else. Everyone else can see how good he would be at that. Even Boromir recognizes it before Aragorn truly does. Theoden has lots of doubts, which we see in his conversations with Gamling and his conversations with Aragorn. Whereas in the books, he just kind of, once he's healed, that's it, and he's ready to go, and he's back to his old self as soon as Gandalf hands him his sword. Once you see them on the screen, played by real people, some of that kind of epic characterness kind of takes away from the believability. And one of the things that Peter Jackson really made important as part of his filmmaking was that everything that he showed, he wanted to be believable. That was a lot more important back in the late 90s when he was first making the films, because fantasy was kind of not really considered a legitimate way of, winning an Oscar or anything like that. It was very much a niche kind of thing and a bit tongue-in-cheek and wasn't really taken seriously. Obviously, since then, there's been a lot more fantasy stuff that has been taken seriously. And so maybe it's less important now to really go for that believability. But back then, the pressure Peter Jackson felt was that if these films were to be taken seriously, everything needed to be believable. And that needed some changes to the characters. Now, here's what I really like about the way that Tolkien wrote the books. As a historian, we know that when something is written down, it shows certain biases of the recorder. It might be an unconscious bias where they're writing down the way that they see things. It might be a conscious bias where they're actively choosing not to include certain things, or it may be a bias based on the witnesses that they have at their disposal. For example, a recorder who was writing in the medieval period about the Battle of Agincourt, if he mostly had access to French eyewitnesses, he might get a different recalling of the battle than if he was mostly talking to English eyewitnesses. Now, Frodo, remember, his main source for the information where he wasn't around would be Merry and Pippin, because he finished off writing the book after they had returned to the Shire. He would have got some information from Gandalf as well, and some information from the other members of the Fellowship, but mostly from Merry and Pippin. And in fact, Frodo never met Theoden at all. So the differences in character between the films and the books, we could explain as them being recorded by different recorders. Maybe the books are the historical documents that are recorded by Frodo based on the eyewitnesses that he had, whereas the films might be recorded by different individuals. Changes such as the character change in Theoden might be recorded differently from Merry and Pippin's point of view, where they mostly saw the really positive outward sides of him, whereas Gamling and Aragorn were kind of let in on the doubts that Theoden was feeling during the Battle of Helm's Deep and in the planning stages afterwards. The doubts that Aragorn has, he only really shares with Gandalf and Arwen, and it seems unlikely that those two would really have shared those with Frodo. And maybe even if they did, Frodo wouldn't have felt comfortable putting those doubts into his historical book about who is now the reigning king of Gondor. I really like this theory. Well, it's not really a theory. It's just my headcanon of the films and the books being different sources that are sharing what is essentially the same story, but with slight changes based on who the eyewitnesses that are being interviewed are. What do you think? Do you think this is a good way of reconciling the differences between the books and the films? Can you think of any anything in the films, any changes that might put paid to this theory or might support this theory? Do leave them in the comments down below. If you want to support the channel, you know the ways that you can do that on YouTube, and I've left the link to my Patreon in the description as well. Do check that out. And big thanks to everyone who's supporting me over on Patreon. Thank you, everyone, and I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye.